The trouble began on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air smells of pine and the creek behind my property gurgles softly. I'd moved to this rural corner of the county 3 years ago, drawn by the quiet and the chance to tend my beehives and garden. My 2-acre lot, bordered by a narrow easement and a sparkling creek, felt like a slice of paradise. The HOA, a small outfit run by a handful of neighbors, mostly left me alone, until Karen Davis decided I was her new project. It started with my mailbox. I'd painted it a deep forest green, a shade that blended with the cedars lining my drive. Karen, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, knocked on my door clutching a neon yellow violation notice. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun and her smile was all teeth. HOA rules mandate neutral tones, she said, thrusting the paper at me. Beige, white, or gray. Fix it by Friday or it's a $50 fine. I pointed out that the HOA handbook, buried in a drawer, listed no such rule. She blinked, unaccustomed to pushback, and muttered something about checking the bylaws before storming off. I repainted the mailbox beige, figuring it wasn't worth the fight, but Karen wasn't done. A week later, I noticed wooden posts sprouting along our shared property line right where the easement gave me creek access. The next day, a chain-link fence was taking shape, its metal glinting in the sun. The creek where I'd spent countless evenings sketching or watching dragonflies was now blocked. I checked my property deed. The easement was mine, clear as day, and no fence could legally stand there. Armed with the deed and a surveyor's map, I approached Karen's house. Her lawn was manicured to perfection, a stark contrast to my wildflower-dotted yard. She answered the door in a pressed blazer as if she'd been waiting for me. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone even, "your fence is on my easement. It needs to come down." I showed her the documents. Her eyes flicked over them, then back to me. "The HOA approved it," she snapped. "We're securing the neighborhood." I pointed out that the HOA had no jurisdiction over easements and county law was on my side. Her lips thinned. "We'll see about that," she said, slamming the door. 2 days later, I was pruning my blackberry bushes when a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Deputy Rogers, a lanky man with a calm demeanor, stepped out. Karen trailed behind, arms crossed, her face smug. "Got a call about a property dispute," Rogers said, tipping his hat. Karen launched into a tirade about my non-compliant mailbox and how my encroachment on the creek was lowering property values. I handed Rogers my deed and surveyor's map. He studied them, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, this easement belongs to the complainant. Your fence is illegal. I suggest you remove it." Karen's face reddened. "This is an HOA matter," she sputtered. Rogers shook his head. "County law trumps HOA rules. You've got till end of week or you're looking at fines." He nodded to me and drove off. Karen stood frozen, her fists clenched. I expected her to argue, but she just glared and marched back to her house. As her door slammed, I caught a glimpse of her on the phone, packing furiously. That evening, I sat by the creek, watching the water ripple under the setting sun. Pixel, my collie, nuzzled my hand, oblivious to the storm brewing. I'd won this round, but Karen's defiance hung in the air like smoke. She wasn't the type to back down, her obsession with control evident in her pristine lawn, her endless HOA citations, and now this fence, suggested she saw my property as a challenge to her authority. I didn't know then how far she'd go, but the spark had been lit. The next move was hers, and I braced myself for the fire. The morning after Deputy Rogers shut down Karen's illegal fence, I woke to a sinking feeling. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I stepped outside to check my beehives, hoping the routine of inspecting frames would settle my nerves. Instead, I found chaos. My cedar fence along the creek was sliced in 3 places, the wood splintered as if hacked by a dull blade. Deep tire tracks gouged the muddy creek bank, and one of my beehives, home to a thriving colony, lay in ruins. Frames were scattered like broken toys, honey oozing into the grass, and angry bees buzzed in disarray. Worse was yet to come. As I surveyed the damage, Pixel, my collie, yelped and limped toward me, a rusty nail embedded in her paw. I pried it loose, revealing a crude nailboard hidden in the weeds near the fence line. My stomach churned. This wasn't random vandalism, it was deliberate. At the vet, Pixel whimpered as Dr. Chen cleaned the wound, prescribed antibiotics, and warned me to watch for infection. "She's lucky it wasn't deeper," he said. I drove home with Pixel curled in the backseat, my anger hardening into resolve. Karen had crossed a line, and I wasn't playing defense anymore. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras with night vision, each capable of sending real-time alerts to my phone. By dusk, they were mounted, 2 on the fence posts, 1 near the beehive and 1 overlooking the creek. Next, I called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision and grit. She arrived the next morning, her pickup loaded with fluorescent orange stakes and laminated placards. "Tampering with survey markers is a felony," she said, hammering the first stake into the ground. Each placard warned of criminal penalties, their bold text glowing in the sunlight. Nora's work confirmed my property line extended to the creek, exactly as my deed stated. "Let's see them mess with this," she said with a grin. That night I barely slept, my phone propped on the nightstand. At 1:13 a.m., it buzzed with a camera alert. I opened the live stream, heart pounding. 2 figures moved in the grainy footage, their hoodies casting shadows under the moonlight. One, tall and lanky, wielded bolt cutters, snapping my fence wire with practiced ease. The other, shorter, with a flash of platinum blonde hair, yanked Nora's stakes from the ground and tossed them into the creek. The taller figure's face turned briefly toward the camera, his grimace caught in a sliver of light. I didn't need facial recognition software to know who they were. Karen's hair was unmistakable, and her accomplice's lanky frame screamed Chandler, a local troublemaker known for petty scams. I called Deputy Rogers at dawn, emailing him the footage. He arrived within the hour, his cruiser kicking up gravel. "That's Chandler Hicks," he said, squinting at the stills on my phone. "Been on probation since a check kiting stunt in 21. He watched the video again, nodding Karen's distinctive hair and the bolt cutters. "This is enough for a warrant." By noon, Rogers had secured one for criminal mischief and trespassing. He and 2 deputies headed to Chandler's rundown trailer first. Body cam footage later showed Chandler, bleary-eyed in pajama pants, insisting he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up the camera still, Chandler mid-snarl, clutching bolt cutters. "Care to explain this?" Rogers asked. Chandler's mouth snapped shut. Karen's arrest was less dramatic but no less satisfying. Rogers found her at home, pruning her roses as if nothing had happened. In her garage, deputies uncovered a damning haul: Nora's fluorescent stakes, still damp from the creek, a can of red spray paint matching the graffiti on my no trespassing signs, and one of Nora's laminated placards crumpled in a trash bin. Karen claimed Chandler had stored tools there without her knowledge, but Rogers wasn't buying it. "You're on camera, ma'am," he said, cuffing her. "Let's sort this out downtown." Karen made bond by lunch, her attorney already spinning excuses. Chandler wasn't so lucky. His probation status meant a no-bond hold, and he sat in county jail awaiting a hearing. As I watched Karen's SUV speed away from her house, I replayed the camera footage, her blonde hair glinting in the moonlight. She'd underestimated me, thinking her HOA clout and a lackey like Chandler could bully me into submission. But the evidence was ironclad, and the law was closing in. Pixel slept at my feet, her paw bandaged but healing. The fight was far from over, but for the first time I felt the tide turning. With Karen and Chandler's arrests, I thought the worst was behind me. But the vandalism and trespassing were just the tip of a much larger iceberg. My lawyer Elliot, a wiry man with a knack for spotting financial discrepancies, suggested we dig deeper. "Karen's gate didn't build itself," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Let's follow the money." We subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, focusing on the $3,500 used to fund the illegal gate Karen had erected on my easement. What we uncovered was a bombshell that shook the entire neighborhood. The records revealed a cashier's check signed by Chandler Hicks, drawn from the HOA's reserve account, labeled as Community Gate Installation. But Elliot's audit went further, exposing a pattern of suspicious transactions. Chandler, who moonlighted as the HOA's bookkeeper, had written checks totaling $46,900 over 2 years for grounds improvements that never materialized. There were no new benches, no repaired sidewalks, no promised playground, just a paper trail of consulting fees and maintenance contracts funneled to shell accounts. The gate was merely the latest in Chandler's schemes, and Karen's fingerprints were all over it. Elliot traced one $5,000 payment to Karen's personal bank account, labeled as landscape consulting. Karen, whose idea of landscaping was hiring a teenager to mow her lawn, had no business collecting consulting fees. The HOA board, a group of well-meaning but overworked retirees, was horrified. At an emergency meeting, they voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler and demanded a full investigation. "We trusted him," said Mrs. Larson, the board treasurer, her voice trembling. "This betrayal hurts us all." Detective Miriam Page, from the county's white-collar crime unit, took the case. A sharp investigator with a no-nonsense demeanor, she seized Chandler's home computer and external drives. What she found was a digital goldmine of fraud, forged receipts for non-existent landscaping projects, fake HOA meeting minutes approving emergency funds, and a word template for neon green approval stamps used to legitimize bogus invoices. Page's team also uncovered emails between Chandler and Karen discussing property acquisition and easing out My Creek access. One email from Karen read, "Handle the stakes tonight and we'll split the easement once it's annexed." It was a smoking gun, tying her directly to the vandalism and the broader land grab. Karen lawyered up immediately, hearing James Hall, a defense attorney whose $600 an hour rate screamed desperation. Hall refused to comment, stonewalling Page's questions with practiced ease. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down on her innocence, claiming Chandler had acted alone and tricked her into storing the stolen survey stakes. But the evidence, my camera footage, the spray paint can, and now the financial records, painted a different picture. Her HOA power trips, once confined to mailbox colors and lawn ornaments, had escalated into felony territory. Chandler, facing probation revocation for his 2021 check-kiting scheme and new charges of theft and conspiracy, was less defiant. Stuck in county jail with no bond, he saw the walls closing in. Detective Page offered him a lifeline: cooperate fully and the DA might consider a plea deal. Chandler, sweating through his orange jumpsuit, agreed to testify against Karen. "She called the shots," he told Page, detailing how Karen had promised him a cut of my land once the HOA reclassified the easement. His confession was a turning point, cracking open the case like a walnut. For me, the small wins started piling up. The HOA board sent a formal apology, acknowledging their oversight in letting Chandler handle finances unchecked. Neighbors, once wary of Karen's influence, began stopping by with casseroles and kind words. "You're doing us all a favor," said Mr. Patel, who'd fought Karen over his backyard shed. Pixel's paw healed, and she resumed her joyful romps by the creek. The fluorescent stakes Nora had reinstalled stood firm, a quiet symbol of my reclaimed boundaries. As I watched the sun set over the creek, the water catching the last golden light, I felt a cautious optimism. Karen's empire of control was crumbling, and Chandler's betrayal had exposed her. But the legal battle was far from over. Elliot warned that Karen's attorney would fight tooth and nail, and Chandler's testimony, while damning, needed to hold up in court. Still, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, knowing the truth was on my side, and the evidence was stacking higher by the day. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the packed gallery. Months of legal wrangling had led to this moment, the trial of Karen Davis and Chandler Hicks for felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. I sat in the front row, my lawyer Elliot beside me, his notepad filled with meticulous notes. Across the room, Karen sat rigid, her platinum blonde hair now dulled by stress, her $600 an hour attorney whispering in her ear. Chandler, in an ill-fitting suit, looked like a man who'd already lost. Chandler's fate was sealed before the trial began. Facing probation revocation for his 2021 check-kiting scheme, he pled guilty to those charges, earning an 18-month prison sentence. The new charges stemming from the vandalism and HOA fraud carried heavier penalties, but the DA offered a deal: 4 years with parole eligibility and 2 if he testified truthfully against Karen. Chandler, desperate to shave years off his sentence, took it. His testimony would be the linchpin, but my camera footage and the financial records were the steel in the prosecution's case. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lena Torres, opened with a timeline of Karen's vendetta. She played my motion sensor camera footage on a courtroom screen. Chandler, bolt cutters in hand, slicing my fence at 1:13 a.m. Karen, her blonde hair unmistakable, tossing survey stakes into the creek. The time-stamped video of them loading rebar into Karen's SUV at 12:47 a.m. drew gasps from the jury. Torres then presented the HOA financial records, highlighting the $46,900 Chandler had embezzled, including the $5,000 consulting payment to Karen. An email from Karen to Chandler projected in bold text read, "Handle the stakes tonight and we'll split the easement." The gallery murmured and Karen's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Chandler took the stand, his voice shaky but clear. He detailed how Karen had orchestrated the land grab, leveraging her HOA influence to push the illegal gate and fence. She said the creek access would boost property values, he testified, and promised me a cut of the land once the HOA annexed it. He admitted to cutting my fence, destroying my beehive, and planting the nailboard that injured Pixel, all at Karen's direction. "She told me to make it look like vandalism," he said, glancing at Karen. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. Karen's attorney, James Hall, tried to poke holes, painting Chandler as a serial liar with a rap sheet. But Torres countered with the physical evidence. The stolen stakes and spray paint can found in Karen's garage, the laminated survey placards in her trash. Hall's cross-examination of me was brief, focusing on whether I'd provoked Karen with my mailbox paint. I kept my answers calm, letting the evidence speak. The jury, a mix of farmers and retirees, seemed unimpressed by Hall's tactics. After a 3-day trial, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. The foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts for both defendants. Chandler, already sentenced for his probation violation, faced his 4-year plea deal. Karen's bond was revoked, and the judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, $32,000 in restitution to me for damages, and $46,900 to the HOA for the embezzled funds. A 5-year no-contact order barred her from approaching me or my property, even after release. As the gavel fell, Karen's shoulders slumped, her defiance finally broken. I met her eyes as deputies led her away, offering a polite wave, not out of malice, but because it felt like closing a chapter. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, the sky a deep autumn blue. Elliot clapped my shoulder. "You did good," he said. I nodded, thinking of Pixel, now healed, and my beehives slowly recovering. The restitution would help rebuild, but the real victory was reclaiming my peace. The outcome wasn't just about me. Neighbors, freed from Karen's HOA tyranny, sent texts of gratitude. The board promised reforms to prevent another Chandler. Yet I knew challenges lingered. Karen's attorney had already filed an appeal, and the community needed time to heal. As I drove home, the creek glinting through the trees, I felt a quiet strength. Justice had been served, but the work of rebuilding, for me and the neighborhood, was just beginning. The courtroom victory over Karen and Chandler felt like the end of a long storm, but the real work began in the quiet days that followed. The HOA, shaken by the fraud and Karen's abuse of power, moved quickly to rebuild trust. A new board was elected. Mrs. Larson, the treasurer who'd been blindsided by Chandler's schemes, took the lead, joined by Mr. Patel, who'd once battled Karen over his shed, and a few others determined to restore integrity. Their first act was a formal letter of apology, hand-delivered to my doorstep. "We failed to oversee our finances and enforce fair rules," it read. "Your diligence exposed a betrayal that hurt us all. Thank you." Enclosed was a $4,500 check funded by Chandler's frozen bank account to repair my shattered beehive and replace the damaged fence. I tucked the letter in a drawer, a reminder that even broken systems could mend. The money was a start, but the land itself needed healing. The creek bank, scarred by tire tracks, and the easement, once choked by Karen's illegal fence, were mine again. I decided to transform the contested area into something life-giving. With the restitution funds and some savings, I hired a local contractor to build a greenhouse where Karen's posts had once stood. The structure went up over a crisp November week, its glass panels catching the sunlight like a promise. I filled it with tomato starts, basil, and sunflowers, their seeds a gift from a neighbor who'd heard about the trial. Each shovel of soil felt like reclaiming not just my property, but my sense of home. Pixel, my collie, was my constant companion through the process. Her paw, injured by the nailboard Chandler left behind, had fully healed, and she bounded through the fields with her old joy. The vet, Dr. Chen, gave her a clean bill of health, and I celebrated by sneaking her a corner of my sandwich. Watching her chase dragonflies by the creek, I felt a weight lift. Karen's vendetta had tested us, but Pixel's wagging tail and the hum of my recovering beehives were proof we'd come through. The bees, resilient despite the loss of their hive, were producing again, their honey sweeter for the struggle. The neighborhood, too, began to knit itself back together. Karen's reign of petty citations and HOA power plays had left many wary, but the trial shifted something. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to started dropping by, some with zucchini from their gardens, others with stories of Karen's overreach. "She fined me for my birdhouse," one woman confessed, shaking her head. "You stood up to her for all of us." Mr. Patel invited me to a barbecue where the new board shared plans for transparent budgeting and regular audits. "No more Chandlers," Mrs. Larson said, raising a glass. I smiled, feeling a cautious sense of belonging. The community wasn't perfect, but it was trying. Beyond my property, small gestures of renewal took root. The HOA replaced Karen's neon yellow violation notices with polite handwritten requests. A vacant lot, once a point of contention under Karen's rule, was turned into a community compost pile with volunteers dropping off vegetable scraps. I contributed coffee grounds from my morning brew, and Mrs. Larson joked that my bees would approve. These were modest steps, but they carried the weight of intention, a neighborhood learning to trust again. As winter approached, I spent evenings in the greenhouse, the air warm with the scent of soil and growing things. The tomatoes were thriving, their vines curling toward the light, and the sunflowers stood tall, their golden heads nodding in the breeze. I'd sit with a mug of tea, Pixel sprawled at my feet, and think about the journey. The trial had been a crucible, exposing not just Karen and Chandler's greed, but my own resilience. I'd fought with cameras, surveys, and stubborn hope, and I'd won more than a legal battle. I'd reclaimed my peace. Yet I wasn't naive. Karen's appeal loomed, and her attorney's reputation for tenacity meant the fight might drag on. The HOA's reforms were promising but untested, and some neighbors remained skeptical, their trust eroded by years of Karen's control. Still, the greenhouse glowed in the dusk, a beacon of what was possible. The creek flowed freely again, its ripples catching the starlight. I wrote a thank you note to Elliot, my lawyer, and another to Nora, the surveyor whose stakes had stood firm. Their work, like mine, had turned chaos into order. One night, as I locked the greenhouse, a firefly blinked near the creek, a tiny spark in the dark. I thought of the community barbecue, the compost pile, the bees humming in their hives. New opportunities were unfolding, not just for me, but for all of us. The road ahead would have its bumps, but for now I walked back to the house with Pixel at my side, ready to plant the next seed. A year after the trial, with the greenhouse thriving and the creek sparkling under spring sunlight, I thought the saga with Karen was finally behind me. Then a certified letter arrived from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir. She asserted a private right-of-way across my easement, citing a supposed deed granting her access to the creek. The document, typed in a suspiciously modern font, smelled of desperation, a last-ditch attempt to stir trouble and force a settlement. My lawyer, Elliot, barely suppressed a laugh when I showed him. "This is amateur hour," he said, pointing out inconsistencies in the deed's notarization. Elliot and Nora, the surveyor whose fluorescent stakes had been pivotal, got to work. Nora's records confirmed no such right-of-way existed, and a quick title search revealed the deed was a forgery, likely cooked up by Elaine to exploit Karen's incarceration. We filed a motion to dismiss, and Elaine, facing perjury risks, withdrew her claim before the court hearing. "She's got no leg to stand on," Elliot said, handing me the dismissal notice. I framed it next to the HOA's apology letter, a quiet trophy of battles won. Smaller victories trickled in through the mail. The state's crime victim fund began garnishing Karen's prison wages, $58 a month, a drop in the bucket against the $32,000 she owed me and the $46,900 owed to the HOA. It would take decades to clear the debt, but the checks, arriving like clockwork, carried symbolic weight. Each one was a reminder that Karen's actions had consequences, even behind bars. I deposited them into a savings account for future beehive expansions, letting her pennies fuel growth she'd tried to destroy. Then came an unexpected letter, this one in a plain envelope with a prison postmark. It was from Chandler Hicks, now a year into his 4-year sentence. In neat handwriting, he apologized for the vandalism, the nailboard that hurt Pixel, and the HOA fraud. I was greedy and weak, he wrote. Karen dangled promises and I bit. He mentioned earning a paralegal certificate in prison, hoping to make things right after release. Enclosed was a hand-drawn map of my property, suggesting spots for an apple orchard along the creek. Thought your bees might like the blossoms, he added. The gesture caught me off guard, a flicker of remorse from someone I'd written off. I sat with the letter for days, weighing my response. Chandler's actions had caused real harm, but his words felt genuine, stripped of the bravado he'd shown before his arrest. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but holding onto anger felt heavier. I wrote back, keeping it brief. Thanks for the map. The sunflowers are taller than ever. Keep studying. I didn't promise absolution, but I left the door ajar, curious if he'd walk through it someday. The exchange stayed with me, a reminder that even broken things could begin to mend. The neighborhood continued its quiet transformation. The HOA's new board held open meetings, posting budgets online for all to see. Mr. Patel organized a cleanup day and we hauled debris from the creek, including a rusted fence post from Karen's gate. Pixel, fully recovered, darted among the volunteers, her tail a blur. Mrs. Larson shared plans for a community bulletin board, replacing Karen's violation notices with a space for garden swaps and potlucks. These were small steps, but they wove a new fabric of trust. One evening, as I tended the greenhouse, I noticed fireflies blinking along the creek, their glow mirroring the stars above. The tomatoes were ripening, the bees were humming, and Pixel sprawled in the grass, content. I thought of Elaine's failed scheme, Karen's garnished wages, and Chandler's orchard sketch. Each was a thread in a story coming full circle, not just of justice, but of renewal. The land, once a battleground, was now a sanctuary. The community, once fractured, was finding its way. Yet I knew the story wasn't fully written. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, had recently bought Karen's property, hinting at plans for a community garden. I wondered what that might mean, a final transformation of her legacy. For now, I locked the greenhouse and walked home with Pixel, the creek's murmur a steady companion. The fireflies danced, and I felt a deep, hard-earned peace, ready for whatever came next. The spring after Elaine's forged deed fizzled out, a new sign appeared on Karen's old property. Sprout Tomorrow Future Community Garden. The nonprofit, known for turning vacant lots into urban farms, had bought the land at auction, a quiet end to Karen's reign. Her manicured lawn, once a symbol of her HOA tyranny, was now a blank canvas for something better. I felt a twinge of irony. Karen had fought to control my creek access, and now her own land would serve the community she'd tried to dominate. When Sprout Tomorrow's director, Maya Torres, emailed me to consult on native pollinator gardens, I didn't hesitate. My bees and I were ready to help. Maya met me at the property, her clipboard brimming with sketches. We want this to be a hub, she said, gesturing across the half-acre lot. Vegetables, flowers, a place for kids to learn about plants. She'd heard about my beehives in the trial and thought my expertise could shape a garden to support pollinators like bees and butterflies. I suggested milkweed for monarchs, coneflowers for bumblebees, and lavender to draw honeybees from my hives. We walked the property, mapping out raised beds and a wildflower meadow where Karen's pristine grass once stood. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her land, once a battleground for control, would now nurture life. The first volunteer day arrived on a sunny Saturday, the air buzzing with possibility. I brought my brush cutter to clear overgrown patches, expecting a small crew. Instead, dozens showed up, neighbors, HOA board members, even Deputy Rogers, who traded his sheriff's badge for a pair of work gloves. Figured I'd pitch in, he said, grinning as he hauled a wheelbarrow of compost. Mrs. Larson, the HOA treasurer, organized a tool station, while Mr. Patel handed out seed packets. Kids from the neighborhood darted around, planting marigolds under Maya's guidance. Pixel, my collie, wagged her tail at the chaos, stealing a stray glove and earning laughs. We worked until dusk, transforming Karen's lawn into something unrecognizable. Volunteers tilled the soil, built raised beds, and planted rows of tomatoes, zucchini, and beans. The wildflower meadow took shape, its seeds scattered with care. A teenager painted a sign that read, "Sprout Tomorrow Community Garden." Its bright colors a rebuke to Karen's neon yellow violation notices. Rogers and I teamed